Well, hey everybody, my name is Emily Procter, and for those of you who don't know me, I was on a show called CSI Miami for a long time, and before that I was on the West Wing. We are knee deep in the Corona quarantine. Um, so I had my daughter Pippa during season 10 of CSI Miami, and after I had her, I realized that I wanted to stay home and just be a parent. And then a couple of years ago, I went back to doing what I had always loved to do, which was work in community. And I started a nonprofit. And I know everyone has their own version of content during this time, but I thought from my perspective, it might be really helpful to introduce nonprofits that I feel passionately about and that also have really interesting content to offer during this time and perhaps even some insight.
Hi, Emily. Good to see you again. My name is Ian Villatoro. I am the National Operations Manager over at Defy Ventures.
Hi, Emily, and my name is Quan and Huynh, and I am the Post-Release Program Manager over at Defy Ventures.
Well, maybe this is the best first question. Ian, how long have we known each other and where did we meet?
I think we've known each other roughly 2.5 years, perhaps.
Yeah.
We first met at Kern Valley State Prison, which is a maximum security 180 prison in the Central Valley here in California.
Quan, how about you? Tell me a little bit about yourself and where we met. You and I met in a parking lot.
We met on the bus going to Kern Valley State Prison. I think that's where we met.
Yep.
We were on the bus to go into Kern Valley where Ian was housed. So that's where we met. I would say that's about 1.5 years ago, around there.
How long were you in prison?
I've done a total of 22 years of my life in correctional institutions, and I paroled in 2015 from a life sentence. I was involved as a entrepreneur in training through Defy Ventures while in prison, and I continued with it after I came home and created my first company 6 months after.
And Ian, what about you? How long were you incarcerated for?
So I spent 12 years in correctional facilities, 8 of those years right there at Kern in Max where we met.
When I first volunteered, and the first time I ever went to prison, I volunteered with Defy, which is an amazing organization. And I said something when I was in there about jail. And everyone laughed at me. And I said, what? They said, you're not in jail, you're in prison. And I said, is it different? And that's the day that I learned that jail is where you go to await sentencing and prison is where you go when you've been sentenced. Can y'all help me out with other vocabulary that you all would know, a glimpse into that world that other people might not know?
The vocabulary or the slang that you use on the inside usually stays there. Just off the lockdown is a really good one. The slam down is just an alternative way of saying it. Something that's very popular, very common in prison is kites. You send somebody a kite, which is basically a message, a handwritten note that is packaged into a very, very small little bundle that can then be fished on a tier, be sent here or there. It's written in very small letters. It's a very small communication.
What do you do when you literally have nothing to do?
In a previous conversation with Quan, we've been talking about the difference in attitudes between people that, leave better than they came in and people that don't, and what they do with that time when they are isolated. And it boils down to staying productive. I, for one, had a schedule that I kind of adhered to. It included things like self-care, exercise, some of the routine things. It included reading, it included writing. And then something that, I always tell people, when you have a lot of time on your hands, take advantage of it. Master something. Become an expert in one thing. It doesn't even have to be something super important or something super sophisticated. Right now, if you know nothing about economics or the economy, master it.
What would you say you mastered? What was the thing that you mastered, or your first thing that you mastered when you said, oh, this is going to be a great way for me to learn while I'm in here?
when I was alone, with my thoughts and doing a lot of introspection, I started exploring a lot of the labels that I had kind of internalized.
Mm.
But I also paid attention to the labels that I had that I didn't necessarily live up to. One of those labels was being a father, and I chose to master being a father, knowing darn well that there is no way to master being a parent. Uh,
That's
it's
true.
it's nearly impossible, but I learned everything that I possibly could in order for me to have a successful relationship with my daughter. Everything from, and it was interesting because I had to include a lot of different things that I learned from different disciplines: interpersonal communication, child development, um, even learning patterns of behavior, thinking patterns that I had, being impulsive, projecting my expectation on other people. Like, all of these things I had to identify and really work on in order to master being a father. And so I spent a lot of time doing that.
I remember when I had got into trouble and was basically taken off the main line, and just figuring out like where I wanted to go with everything, and realizing where's my life going, and what's this sense of identity in this label. Like, up until that moment, I had these labels or a sense of identity of, okay, I am a self-made hustler, I run football tickets, I am a gang member, like all these things, these false senses of identity that I had created about myself. And then realizing, and I think the hard part, like what Ian's alluding to, is accepting that this was all fake, and realizing like I wanted something new. But even in doing that, like there was a part of me that realized that any sense of identity, no matter how fake, was better than no sense of identity. And that was where the resistance came
Wait,
from.
hang on. That's such a big thought. I want to stop and talk about that for a minute, because I spend a lot of my time right now with the work that I'm putting together for a children's program, talking about narrative, talking about being a non-fictional being, living a fictional existence, and how the construct of narrative affects our choices and our lives and our happiness. Mm-hmm. And I have really spent the last year trying to come up with a program to tackle racial narrative and to tackle the narrative of poverty. And you just blew my mind, because you're saying that even the fictional ID was important, that the loss of total identity was a crusher.
Well, I saw it in a lot of men around me. I mean, I experienced it in myself. Let's just say, like, there's this narrative or this script that I've been telling myself over and over in my head. And I'm sure you've run into people, like, you see, like, oh, like, say, for example, somebody that's angry, and you let them know, man, why are you so angry? And they're like, they've never viewed themselves as angry, and you're telling them this, and then they're like, but everything, and you can reflect, you can show them, but they will hold on to every last part of that identity, even if they know it's fake, because without it, there's no sense of identity. And that's what I'm talking about, like, for my process of, like, being able to begin the process of change when I was in there. So, and Ian and I talked about this today, and we see this with anxiousness in people during this quarantine or lockdown, or however we want to call it, this sense of loss of identity, or the loss of a previous label, that they're not able to feel productive. They may be unable to feel like they're contributing or living up to this script of who they are as a person, and now trying to figure something new. Some of them will hold on to, no, we're going to go back to work soon, or become agitated and angry with close friends and family members, or whatever it is, but all just to fulfill this sense of identity or label or script that they've laid out for themselves in their head.
Your first 48 hours, not in jail, but your first 48 hours in prison, what did that do to your identity?
The first 48 hours, there isn't, it's not it's not a whole lot of time to really think about your identity. I think you're just really trying to absorb as much as you can, familiarize yourself with your environment. It's very instinctual at that point. It's more of survival for the
Yeah.
most part. And so you're definitely trying to learn from your environment, trying to learn from others.
Going back to what we were just talking about, the culture of negativity, the narrative of negativity. I mean, how many people are in there who have just led a string of events that allow them to believe that they are deeply negative people?
You definitely begin to conform to that environment, to that way of thinking, the way that you're treated. You're treated very, very differently. I don't know if a second class citizen, I don't know the exact word to use, but you're definitely treated as something other than a regular person.
And do you believe it?
Yeah, at some point you do start to internalize that. You do start to conform to that.
What would you say to people who are listening to that and hear that and think, oh, well, that's the way it should be. You committed a crime. You should have a second class identity. Do you think that's helpful? What would you say to somebody who is having that thought about it?
I can understand a victim thinking that way, a victim that's harmed. And look, there should be accountability. However, the reality is that most people that are in prison are going to come home at some point, and they will be somebody's neighbor. And the way that the system has been set up,
Will be somebody's parent.
Exactly. Who do you want returning back to society? Do you want a person, coming back better or worse off than when they went in? And unfortunately, the way that the system is set up, most people, unless they have help, unless they're taught otherwise, come back worse off.
What do you guys think it's going to be like for us to come out of quarantine?
You could come out just like coming out of a lockdown in prison, or coming out of prison, or coming out of a quarantine. I would say look at this as an opportunity to come out better. There's opportunities around. Earlier you were asking about like what would you say to people when they said these are people that committed crimes or they deserve to, and I'd like to, like, everything Ian talked about is right on, and I'd like to bring it from a different perspective, is that like, what do you fundamentally believe? Like, do you believe that, like, I personally believe that every human being can be salvaged. I believe that there's goodness in every single human being. So if that's the case, then there's another way to look at second chances, or the possibility of a person to change their mindset or their belief or their life at any given moment once they begin this path. So that's what we're talking about there. But coming out from this, maybe if somebody can look at this as an opportunity to build stronger relationships with family, or to take up this hobby that they've always wanted to do, or maybe look at a way to pivot their business. I don't know, like one of my friends the other day said, like, these are crazy times, but then part of me thinks, okay, but you know what, like if I really think about it, would I want to live at any other time than this? Like, at least I get to live at this time and get to experience it and to see what happens.
Yeah.
I mean, it can be its own journey, and that's, I mean, we're here, we're experiencing, so why not embrace it and see what we can build out of this.
Quan, I've heard you mention a spread before in prison, and I wanted to ask you guys about that. Will you tell everybody what a spread is? And then how, with limited resources, do you put on a spread? And do you have any recipes you want to share?
I mean, unless your listeners are interested in recipes that are all ramen based, for the most part, I don't know.
Come on, I've heard tale of the prison burrito. I've heard it's good.
They're fantastic.
I'm gonna have a spread, and let me ask you this: do you have a spread in the way that we have a big meal here? Do you have a spread for Easter, or do you have a spread for a birthday, or how do you say, like, the time is now? We need to spread it out.
So I'd like to answer that one.
Go ahead.
let's just say like right around in there when we had our Vietnamese and Chinese New Year's, we would, like what Ian's talking about, our network, I would reach out to somebody that works in the kitchen, and let's say if I can get my hands on some raw chicken that they can get out of the kitchen beforehand, and we get our hands on some fresh vegetables, and then we supplement that with stuff that we can already buy on the canteen, like rice, top ramen noodles, soy sauce or whatever, and we just learn to cook. I mean, it's
and
funny
do you have a hot plate in your room? Where are you cooking this?
Well, in your room, we have hot plates. We have, I mean, there's a pot, and I mean, I cooked mine inside a empty tomato can, and it was a empty tomato can, and I had a hot pot, but I took off, so I just used a metal plate that still heats it, and we can still cook inside it. One of the things I did in prison is because let's say I get raw chicken, and I could put it into a Ziploc bag, but then we don't have a refrigerator. So I learned like this way where I would seal it and just marinate it and just put it under my bunk where it's cold, not cold like a refrigerator, but still cold, and it marinates the food good so the next day I could cook it. And I came home, and one day my mom was cooking ribs, and she did it today. And she still asked me, because I showed her this maybe a year and a half ago, I seal it and we throw it in the refrigerator, and I say, this is how the flavor gets imbued right into the food. So she loves that way. She's an amazing cook, but she takes that tip that I learned in prison. So I guess that's something that we get pretty resourceful in there.
And who, of the two of you, who's the better cook?
You know, if we're talking burritos and tamales, I would definitely win.
How's a prison burrito different from a regular burrito?
And it also depends how many you're feeding. So just really quick, if you wanted to throw down for, let's say, 10 of your homies,
okay,
Emily, then the base is going to be 3 pork or beef ramen soups, which you then crush and use. You'll then use spicy refried beans, which you will cook with boiling water. Rice, which you will marinate with some of the they sell these Goya flavoring packs that you can sprinkle on top. You blow all of that up together, and then you use a can or something that you can use to fry or cook the meat on top. You then get pork rinds, and as the beans are cooking, you throw pork rinds on top, and so they soften up, but they're on top of the beans. If you want to add a little bit, if you want to add a little kick, and you know, it's obviously not healthy, you can always crunch up some hot cheese crunchies, which are like hot Cheetos.
Like Takis or something?
Something like that, and sprinkle it inside so it gives it like this little spicy kind of taste. You have the tortillas, of course, Velveeta cheese, spread the cheese on it. The beans get laid on it first. Then the rice with the mixture of ramen and the seasoning on top of that. You then put the meat that you've cooked, the pork rinds on top. Hopefully, if you have salsa, you can put some salsa on top of that, and then you just wrap it with Velveeta cheese, of course, because Velveeta cheese is delicious.
I would say it's not even fair on us cooking, because I think at Solano I had access to so much more stuff. Like, you know, the Goya thing, what you're talking about, I would get the actual chicken bones, and I would boil that to make the broth, which would make the rice much better. And I put that into the burrito stuff. So I would have been a better cook.
What do you do when you are living in close quarters and you don't like your cellie? What do you do when you are living adjacent to people who are violent? Did either one of you, I could tell when I asked that question, Ian, you turned your head and you were like, I imagine that's going to be a very hard question to answer, but I do think it's going to be relevant for some people now, because there are people out there who are trapped in a quarantine with people who are violent.
If you are in confined quarters with somebody who you just simply cannot get along with, someone who doesn't run the same program that you do, then the old me would fight. However, the person that I became eventually, you know, once I was able to, and I tell this to people, like once I was able to understand who I was and see myself through a different lens, that then translated to me being able to see other people through a different lens as well.
How did you get there? What was the realization that led you to that?
I think it just took a lot of work. It wasn't just something that happened overnight. You know, I mentioned I was a facilitator with Defy. Defy does a great job of identifying a lot of self-limiting beliefs, doing a lot of the character development work. And there are other programs, of course, that teach, you know, meditation and, you know, that really assist you in getting to know who you are and accepting yourself for who you are, which is incredibly important. Not a lot of people do that. And once I was able to,
I think a lot of people are really know who they are.
and
I
that's
mean,
true.
I think I would have large gaps in my who am I sheet. I'd be like, I don't know.
And for me, like once I was able to come to terms with who I was and understand who I was and accept myself for who I was, um, I developed that empathy for others. Where instead of me trying
Do
to
you think
project
you didn't have empathy before?
very little, I don't think that I took the time to truly understand how other people felt, how other people thought. It was, in a sense, I was kind of selfish. It was all about how I perceive things and what my needs were and what my expectations were. I don't think I had a whole lot of empathy. Afterwards, I learned to stop and really think about, you know, other things that may be influencing people's behavior, and so I was more cautious and I wasn't as impulsive as I was.
You know, it's
Um,
so interesting for me to hear you say that because I consider you to be one of the most empathetic people I've ever met. How amazing to recognize that that was not existent in yourself and to work on it. I want to go back to self-limiting beliefs. How old were you? And Quan, if this applies to you, how old were you when self-limiting belief started?
Self-limiting beliefs began for me, I would say, before I was 8 years old, around 7, 8. I grew up in Provo, Utah, and I experienced what I now come to understand as racism. I was teased for my race. I was teased because I looked different, and I remember just growing up thinking, like, why couldn't I just look normal like the other kids around me? So I thought that there was something wrong with me. And every instant that things came up that made me feel that way again, I think I internalized it and started becoming to believe it. Then my father gets diagnosed with leukemia, and he dies about 5 years later. And by that time, when we had moved out here to California, I had already felt like I didn't fit in Utah. When we came out here to California, I remember one of the first conversations I had with other Vietnamese kids that I went to school with, which I never had gone to school with. And they told me that why couldn't I speak Vietnamese well, that I was whitewashed. So there was just this divide for me between fitting in with kids that I thought was normal, and I just wanted to be like any other kid in Utah, and finally coming out here to California and going to school with kids that looked more like me and I thought would accept me, and they're telling me that that I was not like them, and I was somehow that I was rejected by them. So I think that just fed into this belief that I began early on that there's something wrong with me. So then when my father passed away on the day of our first communion and leading up to it, I always wanted to I told myself, I'm just going to pray and he's going to be okay. And God is going to grant this first prayer for me. But the morning of our first communion, I woke up and I found out that he had died. And that was when another belief suddenly came in. Like, it was just more confirmed that, you know what, there is something wrong with me. Even God didn't want to grant my prayer to save my father on this special day. So there must be something fundamentally wrong with me. And I believed that for a long time, which I pushed into a dark corner and I never really addressed until I was doing a life sentence in prison. But yeah, that was, I would have to say, a self-limiting belief that I held on to for many years. Like, something's wrong, I can't. And then on top of that, I don't want to fail, but yet I fail here. I have to get good grades to look good for everybody around me, but there's still something wrong with me inside that I can't let the world know. So all of these tied in together.
you know, when you're a child, when you're a kid, um, you don't take rejection well. You don't take these traumatic experiences well, unless you know you have support, unless you have someone to talk to you and care for you. And absent that, it can be very, very lonely. And eventually, you feel like you don't belong. Like a home, a family doesn't really exist. At least that was my experience. Um, and so there's that sense of wanting to belong to something, uh, wanting to feel that you're cared for. And unfortunately, a lot of the people that I know, a lot of the people that I've met, that have had similar backgrounds, it's a very similar story. That sense of needing to belong, of needing to be heard, needing to be cared for, needing to be loved. It's amazing how often that's at the root of why people make the decision to join gangs early in life.
Well, I mean, getting to know you guys is has been the entire reason why I have gone on to start community programming and to try and really think about infrastructure for children.
There was a time when I was in the darkest parts of my gang days, and I had got into an argument with my brother about it. And my brother basically just asked me, like, what is wrong with you? But for at my head and my understanding at the time, I just felt, you know what, I am exactly where I am supposed to be for once in my life, which was crazy when I look at it now. But I think just thinking back to not feeling like I was accepted and not feeling that I measured up in some way, and somehow in the gang and inflicting violence on others is where I could gain my recognition. So like, I think understanding that when I was in prison and looking back and realizing, you know what, there's probably a core part of me that always feels to this day like I don't belong, or I don't, but then where do I funnel that energy into something good where I can feel like I belong, or I can funnel the energy into where can I do good for the group that I think I belong to, is much different than back in the gang days where I felt, okay, you know what, my father had told me, you always protect your family. And then later on, when I'm in the gang, I justify, well, you know what, my gang is my family. So it doesn't matter if they did something wrong or my gang did something wrong, I'm going to protect them. But now it was more in prison, and then understanding that need to feel a part of something bigger than myself. And that's how I fulfill it today, by trying to make an impact and being part of Defy and helping out other Defy entrepreneurs in training that have come home. And that's how I could fulfill it today. I mean, one of the most fulfilling parts of my job is just being able to give the first call of somebody that's come home and tell them, welcome home. What can I do to have you feel supported?
I would love to hear from you all your version of your arrival at peace. And if you feel like including, what was your best day in prison? And what was your worst? If you want to talk about it. But how the two of you ultimately arrived at peace, became who you are.
The realization when I felt like that something needed to change. I was standing. I was in a segregated housing unit, standing there in boxers and flip flops, you know, listening to a conversation on the tier, and I realized that I was in a concrete box in boxer shorts and flip flops, standing at a mesh door, with nothing else, and I got tired of it because, you know, like clockwork, this was a pattern that I had for every 6 months, and I came to the realization that I sucked. My life sucked. Everything around me just sucked. And I took a really hard look at my reality and who I was and the things that I had done and my circumstances and just everything. And it was horrible. And it was something that I didn't want anymore. And it hit me really hard, but it was, you know, it was necessary for me to really start thinking about the future and start thinking about a change. Um, that was a very difficult day for me. It was a very bad experience because of how I felt, but it turned out to be probably the best day of my life because it was a day that I decided that I could do more and that I could be more, and I was actually going to do something to change my condition. Um, and, you know, the best day, believe it or not, I've had a lot of good days in prison. Um, but just off the top of my head, I think the proudest moment was receiving my first college degree at a ceremony while I was in prison. My daughter was there, and I was a keynote speaker, and I was able to give a speech and encourage her to do what I didn't do, you know, straight out of high school. That was probably the best day for me.
And you were in boxers and flip-flops, just to clarify that for people, because that's all you're allowed to have when you're there, right?
Right. So when we talk about lockdown and being slammed, like that's a real lockdown. You know, out here we have a comfy bed, we have couches, we have internet, we have fridge, stove, we have everything. No,
Pants.
when you are locked down, you have boxer shorts, flip flops, t-shirts, a blanket, a sheet. If you're lucky, a pillow. If you're there long enough, you probably will get a radio or a TV that you can purchase later on. You have $45 worth of canteen maximum underneath your bunk, and that's it.
Juan, what about you? Worst day, best day?
Some of my most beautiful days inside prison, and I would even have to say some of my most beautiful days of being alive were in prison during my solitude. Worst day, well, there was so many, it just mixed into each other. You know, the day I was went to trial and they said guilty, the day that I got my paperwork from the appeals courts that say that they denied it, and basically that was the day. At the time, I believed, okay, my appeals have run out, I have a life sentence, and I'm gonna die in here. That was probably one of my worst days. Yeah, worst day was when, well, worst day, but also the day that I think the healing process began for me was when I wrote a letter to my father when I was incarcerated and read it out loud of things that I was never able to say to him since he had passed. And I read it out loud to someone that was willing to listen, a therapist. And then it was probably writing that letter and reading out loud was the worst. Like it was pulling back the Band-Aid on a huge wound that was still sore, but that was where the process of healing began for me. Best day, there were so many days after my process of change began, connecting with other men on the yard, realizing that I could make an impact in that world I was in, regardless if I was going to die in prison. Being paroled the first day, like flying out from Sacramento Airport and seeing the sunset inside the airport and clearing TSA with no documentation and them letting me through. Yeah, there was a lot of all that mixed in.
One thing I've always felt that it's not the yeses or the no's in life that are hard to live with. It's the because. You know, why did this happen? And the answer is just because. And it seems like in solitude, the two of you were able to process your biggest because answers. And I do think in life, the real heart of it and the real sweet spot comes when we are able to pay attention and process the because. And I think most people, or not most people, but a lot of people just stay busy and distract themselves. And in many ways, we're all getting this opportunity to stay home and think about because, and to think about what life might look like for all of us as we go back and connect to one another in a really deep and meaningful way. I think about all the people I'm going to be so excited to see, and all the things I'm going to be able to do with those people. And none of it includes, you know, like, oh my God, I cannot wait to wear spring's latest mule sandal. That's just going to rock my world. It's like, I just can't wait to hug my mom. And I'm sure that happened for both of you guys. And so you're going to get to have this little mini step ahead of everyone else when we go back. And what do you want to remind people of when quarantine is over? What do you want to remind people of to take with you on your way back out into the world?
I think you're right. A lot of people are going to be very anxious to, reconnect with people, but it's not a one-time thing. One thing I learned about relationships is that they require maintenance. You have to, with the relationships that really matter to you, you have to be incredibly available to those people. And so it's not a one-time thing. Don't go out and just visit someone once. Follow up with them. Be a real friend and be there for people when they most need you. When they don't need you, just be there.
I would like to say or offer up for, because I've asked this for myself, is when this quarantine or lockdown is over and done with, can I look back and still say, I have made myself a better person in some small way? So that is what I would like to ask everyone else. Like, when we're done, like, in what way did you make yourself a better person, or in what way did you still make an impact in the world, or look to make the world a better place? That's what I would like to challenge myself.
Well, I am in it with you guys to make the world a better place. I'm so thankful to know you. I'm so thankful to Defy for introducing us, and for giving me this opportunity to talk with you guys and learn more from y'all today. If people do find the idea of Defy interesting, please look on their website. As with any nonprofit, right now it's challenging. So I would encourage you, if you are so moved, to support. And Quan, you have a book coming out when?
July, it looks like, about mid-July or late July, maybe into early August, depending on the schedule of it. Yeah, it's written for men that are doing long or lifetime sentences, and I'm sharing with them how did I find my own sense of freedom while doing a life sentence. I
can't wait to read it. And I'm not a man, not incarcerated, just quarantined.
Mm-hmm.
And Ian, I know you're working on an app that supports positive reentry, and look forward to your release date of that. And I want to thank you guys so much for today, for your time and for your stories. And I wish you all health and happiness.
Thank you.
Thank you, Emily.
Thanks, guys.